Welcome back to our sequence on real-world considerations in engineering design. In this session, we will take a brief look at the economic consequences of the many purchasing and marketing decisions that go along with the engineering design process and the products that result. Today, we will look at three specific concepts involved that focus on minimizing economic harm: fair wages, fair value, and fair trade. Many an amateur philosopher has tried to simplify the goodness or badness of outsourcing, but in a global economy, outsourcing is here to stay, and minimizing its negative effects is something that every engineer can contribute to. At first glance, ABET, the organization that oversees accreditation and quality of the engineering programs in the United States, does not seem to address these economic consequences. While economic constraints, including cost and price, are part of what engineering students do and learn as they advance through their programs, economic consequences seem absent. Why? Is the omission because these are issues for those in economics, international relations, or another non-technical field? Well, no. In fact, the economic consequences of the many things we purchase, provide guidelines to purchase, and sell to customers are buried in Outcome C for engineering students. While the term sustainability is often associated exclusively with the environmental consequences of human action and choice, the term has been broadened by the Brundtland Commission and subsequent summits to consider social and economic consequences as well. Considering the tremendous role that economics plays in what engineers have the opportunity to design, these consequences are central to most engineering design efforts. In other modules in this series, we have talked about the primary economic constraints that are considered in engineering design: cost and price. While cost and price must be considered during the design process, economic consequences that arise from engineering design and the development and production of a product may join price and cost as economic constraints, depending on the goals of the corporation as well as the impact that considering those consequences can have on its reputation, credibility, and mission. With this in mind, we'll take a look briefly at what matters economically beyond cost and price of products and designs. As with social and environmental consequences, we will take a look at economic consequences with an emphasis on minimizing harm done in doing business with developing countries. While outsourcing is largely thought to be driven by taking advantage of cheap labor in other countries, there are ways to approach outsourcing in such a way that benefits rather than exploits that labor. Fair wages are a major part of effective outsourcing, but what is a fair wage? At a big picture level, fair wages are a way to minimize or reduce economic inequality, or the gap between the rich and the poor, not just because it is a nice and compassionate thing to do, but because less economic inequality historically leads to greater growth and prosperity in communities ranging from small villages to entire countries. Too much economic inequality, or too much of a gap between the haves and the have-nots, is known to hinder long-term growth for a nation and to decrease the incentive to be productive for those who are poor. If the poor are not well paid, they become less motivated to work and ultimately are less productive. Low-income jobs also lead to perceptions that it is not possible to escape from poverty, which subsequently reduces risk-taking, which is needed to create wealth within a country or a nation. Through this ripple effect of extreme poverty, it all comes back to the fact that cheaper is not always better, and economic equality should be a goal not only for a country, but for the companies that invest in that country. However, economic inequality is not just about income. Rather, it takes into consideration overall or national wealth as well as consumption patterns among a country's inhabitants. Establishing fair wage is not simple, but luckily we have some help. Fair wages are essentially a means to pay workers that balances considerations of the cheapest possible labor costs with promoting economic equality. Fair wages ultimately benefit the global economy and are rarely prohibitive to the profits of companies choosing to pay them. Fortunately, in our globalized information age, determining a fair wage is very accessible to any multinational corporation, whether big or small. The International Labor Organization makes it easy by publishing average monthly wages for workers in various countries, taking into account the cost of living in those estimates and providing an accurate estimate of what is truly a fair wage to inhabitants. These equalized or normalized wages vary widely, with a threefold increase from Pakistan, ranked 70th in the world at $255 a month, to the Ukraine, ranked 52 at $686 a month. Moving further up in wage rankings, the gap between developing and developed countries becomes glaringly apparent, with the United States providing a monthly average wage adjusted for cost of living at over $3,000. It may seem like a simple choice in the U.S. to keep jobs in America, but often when corporations do so, they end up paying less than a fair wage to remain competitive with companies who are outsourcing to lower wage countries. This ultimately hurts rather than helps both Americans and the United States as a whole. Fair wages are just one part of the economic consequences puzzle. On the other end of the spectrum, where the customer stands, is the issue of providing fair value, or providing products at a price that is not what some or all customers will pay, but what is fair for them to pay. But why bother charging a customer less than they are actually willing to pay? As with fair wages, the answer to this question relies on a longer-term view of doing business. Customers who are charged fair value end up being more loyal. In fact, research has shown that a more satisfied customer will be less sensitive to price in the future, so that over the long haul, they are willing to pay more for a product. But as with fair wages, this begs the question of how to determine the fair value or fair price. Customers tend to judge price fairness based on how acceptable that price seems for the current marketplace, how reasonable the price is given the value of what is being purchased, and how justifiable the price is based on the cost of producing the product. Put simply, customers will pay more when they believe the cost is justified. Let's look at an example where justifiable plays a significant role in customers' perception of fair value. In this case study, we'll examine brand name versus off-brand alkaline batteries. Many a customer who has purchased batteries in a local retail store has noticed the price difference between brand and off-brand batteries. And many a customer has also reached for the cheapest option. But are these many customers really getting a better deal? Well, more than one study has revealed that even though off-brand batteries cost less and deliver the same energy as brand name batteries, they don't deliver that energy for as long, thus making it a wash between the price of off-brand and brand name varieties. Yet even so, customers reach for the cheapest option, putting the burden for justifying a higher price on the manufacturer of the brand name batteries. Although the customer may be willing to pay what he or she perceives to be a reasonable price for brand name batteries, the customer instead often chooses the lower price batteries because of the perception that the name brand price is just not justified. Studies of battery lifetime like that on the previous slide by Wired.com can help counteract what turns out to be a misperception in battery purchase. While fair value, such as that discussed in batteries on the previous slide, focuses on the end customer, we can transition once more back to the opposite end of the supply chain to consider the concept of fair trade. Fair trade, like fair value and fair wages, seeks to minimize economic harm. And as with fair wages, fair trade seeks to minimize that harm in less wealthy countries. Fair trade seeks to set prices in developing countries not simply to funnel more profits to communities selling goods and products, but instead to transfer more control of business and prosperity to not only local farmers, but other small communities around the world as well. Unfortunately, some industries are worse than others in meeting fair trade goals, and the electronics industry in general lags behind other industries in supporting fair trade around the world. Even so, some companies within the electronics industry, such as Nokia, Dell, Apple, Intel, HP, and Microsoft, do a better job of fair trade than others, and knowing this information can help engineers specify products from companies which are more invested in minimizing economic harm to others through their business practices. Unlike most of the electronics industry, some industries are breaking new ground in concepts of fair trade, and not in a way that hurts the company's bottom line either. Consider the 3D printing industry. Using this cutting-edge technology to make shapes, prototypes, and models of all sorts takes a special kind of plastic filament. This puts the 3D printing industry in a potential position to further contribute to the proliferation of plastic around the world and contribute to the resulting trash and environmental crisis from widespread plastic disposal and transport. Instead, however, this industry seeks to produce these filaments from recycled plastic, a process that not only does not eat into the bottom line profits of a company, but does not contribute to further environmental harm. And it can also serve waste workers in developing countries around the world. Drawing resources from waste piles rather than raw materials creates business and jobs for waste workers around the world. Since waste workers have largely been ignored in fair trade, this gives the 3D printing industry a timely and almost ideal opportunity to initiate fair trade near the beginning of a new industry. While ramping up the recycling of plastic to support filament production, the 3D printing industry is also supporting the increased presence of fair trade among waste workers, seeking to provide these workers with a fair price for their recycled materials that supports autonomy among these small community operations. In summary, striving for fair wages, fair value, and fair trade are tangible and practical ways to not only reduce the negative economic consequences of delivering technology into a world where technology's role continues to expand, but is also a way to use technology and the products that derive from it to support global economic growth and health. This can be done by reducing economic inequality, not only in our country, but in the many countries in which we and the corporations we work for do business. Thank you for joining us. We certainly hope that this introduction to the economic consequences of doing business in a globalized world has been helpful, and that you'll join us again as we look at additional real-world considerations in engineering design.